Oh, it's a great honor to study again Parashat Shemos. I study with everybody in this group. I enjoy it very much. And this week's parasha is Parashat Shemos, and we're beginning the book of Shemos. So the new books, as I was saying before we started recording it, that the we know about the 5 books of Torah, but the Gemara, Masechah Shabbos, talks about there being 7 books because the Gemara divides the book of Bamidbar into 2 parts. The first part, which is really talking about the encampments, and the second part, which is their complaints, separated by the section, which is the backward nuns, which is called Vayibin So Aaron, which is the minimum number of letters contained in a book in order to go in to save it on Shabbos. So this is the even though we have 5 books, we know 5 books. We know that in the Talmud it talks about there being 7 books. One of the differences, how do we separate the books? So really today, I think we only separate them in 2 ways. One is we say Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek at the end of each of the books. And then at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, we do a holiday called Simchas Torah, which didn't exist in Talmudic times. The holiday was simply not recorded in the Talmud because they used to finish it not every year, but perhaps every 3 years or maybe every 7 years, but they did not finish it every year. And the other distinction is a scribal distinction, that when we write the Torah, you have to leave a space of 4 lines between each of the books. So before you start Book of Shemos, you have to leave a space of 4 lines. This is I learned this the hard way because one time I forgot to mark it with a pencil to leave a space, and I wrote a line there, and that caused all sorts of problems that I had to erase it, and it was not simple. So that was something I learned the hard way. Okay, so now, did you have a question? The Newmans, are you? Oh, not asking a question. Okay, so let us. Hold on. Let us go to the text. Before we go to the text of the parsha, I want to talk for a little bit. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Bruce or April, you have a question? Sure, by all means.
Well, that's a question. So, do they leave 4 lines with where the nuns are?
No, we don't. We don't leave 4 lines where the nuns are. Even though the Talmud talks about there being 7 books, that's kind of like a minor or an esoteric Talmudic argument, but there are not 4 lines there. There is differentiator, and that's the backwards nun, and each of the backwards nuns, it takes up like a line, but there are not 4 lines. There are not 4 lines there.
Okay.
So maybe it's not a real book. I don't know what it means, but the Talmud talks about it as being a book. And when you get to Bamidbar, I mean, now we're in Shemos. Well, now that we're in Shemos, so it's the books really have a theme. The theme of Bereshis is the theme of the patriarchs starting out, the matriarchs starting out, the Jewish people, the Exodus. This is leading us from our path of enslavement to building the Mishkan. Leviticus, Vayikra is about purity. Bamidbar and Devarim is the repetition, Moshe's speech, his final speech. Bamidbar really has 2 separate themes. The first theme is the theme of the encampments, and the second theme is the struggles and complaints we made in the wilderness. So okay. Okay, so now let us go, before we go into the text of the narrative. Also, this is a very dear portion to me. It'll always be very special because we talk about Har Sinai here, and I still am very proud of our trip to Mount Sinai, where I wrote the Torah. I contend the first one to write the Torah on Sinai since Moses. Hey. So So this is a very powerful portion, but before we go into the text and we start dissecting the text, I want to just talk about the first, the names of the Jewish people that are mentioned here, which is seemingly superfluous, because why are these names even bothered to be mentioned? Why are we even mentioning? The whole book is called the Book of Names, Shemos, Sefer Shemos, the Book of Names. You would expect it to be the book of the, I guess it's called Exodus in the translation, but that's not a translation of the names, Shemos. It's names, not Exodus. We call it Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So the translations are not exactly matching. Bereshis is a match, but Shemos already it's not a match. It's not a match because Shemos means names and Exodus means that we left Egypt, we left the exile. So why is it called names? I think that the names are significant and that the names talk about whose names, it's our identity, and how are we achieving redemption through our identity. It's very important. The names we choose to give to ourselves tells us who we are. A slave has no name. A person who has no identity has no name. And it's significant that it says that a new king arose who didn't know Joseph. He didn't know the name of Joseph. But then we go to the second chapter, and the second chapter says that a man went from the house of Levi and took a daughter from Levi, and they gave birth to it, and she gave birth to a child, and she saw he was good, and there were no names there either. There's no names there either in that story, and this is prior to Moshe being born. And then she sees him, the daughter of Pharaoh sees him. Incidentally, her name is not mentioned either. She's called the daughter of Pharaoh. And then she's the one who calls him Moshe. She's the one. The daughter of Pharaoh is the one who gives him a name, And sometimes you hear about people like the most significant thing is to know someone's name. I remember many years ago we had when I was at OF, there was I forgot his name. I think he was the Attorney General for a while, and he was unfortunately shot when Reagan was shot, or Dick Thornburg. Remember that name? I don't know if anybody remembers it. Anyway, he had a wife. I don't know, maybe he still does. His wife, Ginny Thornburg. She was a very big activist for people with special needs. And she said, anyway, they had a child who had tremendous brain trauma. They had a child had a brain trauma injury. This woman said to me two significant things. I mean, she would have said more, but I only met her one time. She said to me two significant things, which I will never forget. The first thing, which is not relevant to what I'm talking about, but I'll tell it to you anyway, in case it makes an impact on you, like it made an impact on me. She, at the time that I met her, my wife was pregnant, and she said to me, what are you having, a boy or a girl? I said, whatever God gives us. And she said to me, I'm so inspired to hear that, because sometimes I ask people what they're having and they say, I don't care as long as it's a healthy child. And that breaks my heart, she said. She said, that breaks my heart because her child has this brain trauma. And so it's almost like that child is rejected. If you say, I only want a healthy child. So anyway, that's the first thing she said to me. And I was never actually sensitive to that before, but now since then I'm always sensitive to that, or I try to be. And the second thing she said, she has a child, and she speaks to this child, and he's now an adult. But it's still her child, or her offspring, and he's in a church in Pennsylvania, And she said she calls him every week and after the church services. And she says to him, how was it at church today? And she said, he always says the same thing to her. She said, he says, they know my name. They know my name. That's what he said. And that's interesting here in our portion. It's called names. It's called names. And the children of Israel started out with names, and their names are repeated at the beginning, but then there's a vacuum where we don't know anybody's name. We don't even know, we're not even told at the outset the name of Moshe's parents. We don't know it's almost as like they have no significance because we don't have an identity and we were enslaved. But then when it takes Pharaoh's daughter to recognize Moshe, to pull him out and to save him. And how does she ultimately save him? She could save him by pulling him out of the water, but ultimately she saves him by giving him a name. Ironically, Pharaoh's daughter is not named here. Pharaoh's daughter is not named here. And interestingly enough, Pharaoh's daughter's name is often mispronounced. Well, it's one of those things that's been mispronounced so often that the mispronouncing of the name is actually the correct pronunciation. But the Bible tells us in Chronicles how to pronounce the name. What's the name of Pharaoh's daughter? Anybody want to try to say what's the name of Pharaoh's daughter? Anyone want to say? So
it's Bitya.
Right. So usually people say Batya, but in the Chronicles it says Bitya. But there are some rabbinic sources that call her Batya. But today Batya is a common Jewish name, but nobody calls their child Bitya. So the name has become Batya. I am actually curious now. Let me just look up. Maybe Rabbi Yosef can pull it up for us. I can make him a co-host. We could pull up the Batya on Wikipedia. I want to see what they say in Hebrew. What is the correct name in their Wikipedia entry? Very curious, but because it's so ironic that this whole portion is about names. She's the one who names Moshe, and yet her name has all this confusion around it. Here, Rabbi Yosef, you're gonna have to read it for me. So anyway, in the meantime, what
could it be that her name really was daughter of Pharaoh who was God, and we just changed it to Bitya? Because there's a lot of my former students in Israel were called Bat El, and so it's basically the same idea that she was known to the Egyptians as the daughter of the main god being the Pharaoh, and we, because we knew of how special she was in saving Moshe, that maybe, I don't know.
No, I think you're right about that for sure, but it was just ironic that there is confusion about the proper way to pronounce it. I want to read the Rashi on the names, why we're counting them again, and then read some of the commentary on this concept of the names. So Rashi, it says these are the portion begins the first few verses by telling us actually something we know has already been stated previously. It says these are the names Shemot b'nei Yisrael ha'ba'im Mitzrayim. These are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. As Yaakov, Yishu, Besu, Jacob, each man in his household came. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. All we know all this. Yisachar, Zevulun, Binyamin. We know the tribes. Dan, Naphtali, Gad, V'Asher. Vayikol, Nefesh. Yotzei Yerach, Yaakov, Shivim, Nefesh, V'Yosef, Hayavim, Mitzrayim. All of this is known. All the souls that came out from Egypt. All were 70, and Joseph was in Egypt. So the first point is, why is it being repeated again? And let's see, Rashi tells us, Rashi asks this question, Rashi says, even though he counted them in their lifetime, the Torah comes back and says their names again after they're dead to teach us how precious they are. When someone has a name, they're more precious. When you know their name, they're more precious. And so therefore the Torah says the names again. That's why when when we have a yortzeit, we mention the name of the person who passed away. It's a way of adding, love or preciousness. We sponsor a day of Torah study. We mention the name of the person. It's to show how much we love them. That's just the idea of the preciousness. And that's why Rashi says the Torah is listing them again. And then this is such a powerful Rashi. I'll just continue it. It says that the these are compared to the stars. That God brings them out and brings them in by number and their names. So God has a name, Hamotzi b'mispar. We say this every day in our prayers. Hamotzi b'mispar tziva'am l'kulam b'shem yikra. We say a different verse, but it's the same idea. That God gives all the stars a name. So to us, we look in the planet at night, we look in the sky at night, and we see just a huge number of stars, and they all look the same. But God looks at the stars and has a special name for each one, because they're all God's children, so to speak. Now, each star has a powerful individual name, and it's the same idea that if you name something, it means it's beloved. It's beloved. And that's a message for teachers to have a name for all of their students, for people to have a name for all of their friends, for rabbis to have a name for all of their, people in their congregation, that's the idea that everybody, that the name is what makes it special, and that's why God chooses to give a name to each of the stars, And this is the first idea that these are the names. Shemos, Bnei Yisrael, Ba'im Mitzrayim. What are you saying? What are you showing, Rabbi Yosef? I don't know what you're showing here. Doesn't show up on my screen.
It says, some within Jewish tradition have tried to identify her with a daughter of Pharaoh in 1 Chronicles 4:17, named Bitya. An example
The
of
Gemara
this is
does.
found in Leviticus. Rabbi? Huh?
The
Yeah, but you
Gemara
asked me
doesn't.
what Wikipedia, so Wikipedia. Yeah, so.
Yeah. Okay, it doesn't show up for me, your screen, for some reason. Bitya, I believe, appears twice in the Talmud, and both times she's called Bitya, not Bacha. That's my recollection of it, that she appears twice in the Talmud, twice. Okay, anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about this first verse, just to share some Hasidic ideas about it. There's a lot of beautiful ideas. Ela Shemos B'nei Yisrael. These are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt, but it doesn't use the expression who came. It says who are coming to Egypt in the present tense. And then it says Es Yaakov with Jacob, but there it's an unusual word also. It doesn't say Im Yaakov, it says Et Yaakov. The word Et doesn't really have a meaning, so it's an unusual phrase. And then it says Ishu Veito Ba'u, each man came with his household, but the word ba'o is also superfluous, that they came, but we already know that they came. So we have some ideas here. First, from the Kotzker Rebbe, he says a beautiful idea. He says it's brought down in the Midrash Rabbah that all of the names that the tribes are called by, and this goes to what I was saying before, but the Kotzker Rebbe says it in a much more beautiful way. He says all the names of the tribes hint to redemption. A name is a redemptive moment. When you give someone a name, it's a moment of redemption. And he says, for example, Reuven, Ra'o Ra'isi es ani ami. Behold, I have seen the affliction of my people. Now you're being redeemed. Shimon, Vayishma Elokim esna kasam, meaning to say, in the book of Exodus, the Kotzker says that if you go through the book of Exodus, you're going to see verses that are hinted to by the names of the children. So therefore, he gives two examples, and then he leaves it for the rest of us to find out. The name Reuven is hinted to when God says, Ra'o Ra'isi es ani ami. I've seen the affliction of my people and I'm redeeming them. That's what basically the name Reuven is saying. I saw my son, I saw the affliction. And Shimon in chapter 2, verse 24 of the book of Exodus, it says, Vayishma Elokim es na'akasam. God heard their afflictions. God, Vayishma Elokim es na'akasam. God heard their groans. And so therefore, this is hinting to the fact, says the Kotzker Rebbe, that with the exile also comes the signs of redemption. That contained within the names of the children who are exiled are also the signs of redemption. And that similar idea is to the fact that on Tisha B'Av, we say that on the 9th of Av, the Mashiach was born, meaning to say at the darkest moments of life, that is where it's the moment of redemption. But I was thinking similar to the Kotzker, but I want to go in a slightly different direction, that to name someone is to give them a moment of redemption. That the naming is a moment of redemption. Oftentimes in the Jewish tradition, the practice is to name a child in front of the Aron Kodesh, in front of the Ark, and we're praying for it's a redemptive moment, and we're asking for our prayers for the family, for the child to be fulfilled. So we're praying for redemption at that moment. And so that's perhaps another reason why these names are repeated at the beginning of the portion. It's that this is a prayer for redemption in the dark moment. The Kotzker is saying, no, even in the darkest moment, that's when the redemption will come, from the darkest moment. That's why we say that on the worst day of the year, the darkest moment, Tisha B'Av, Mashiach is born. And so that's why the Kotzker is also saying here in the darkest days, that's where the redemption comes from. The Ger Rebbe, used to say as follows. He used to say that in Kotsk, that's where the Kotzker Rebbe is from, they used to say that these passages of Shibud, of exile and redemption, you have to study them as though it's a halachic matter, not like just a narrative or a story, but you have to view them as though it's a matter of Jewish law, to understand the path from exile to redemption. And of course, isn't that the whole purpose of what we're about? Like, why are we doing all this? Why are we doing any of this? Why are we studying? Why do we keep the faith? It's all about looking for redemption. So this is the blueprint for redemption. This is the blueprint for redemption. This is what we're looking for. We're looking for redemptive moments in every day. We try to have as many redemptive moments as possible in our week, in our month, in our lifetime. And this is the blueprint as to how we get redemption. It says for the exile, this week's portion starts with the exile. There's only one portion dedicated to the exile. But for the redemption, that's the whole rest of the Torah. There's only one portion about the exile, but the redemption is the rest. And indeed, within the exile is the redemption. That is the seed of the redemption within the exile, within these names. And so therefore, it's only once the redemption comes that we see its roots were rooted in the darkest moments. You don't see the redemption in the darkest moments, but once the redemption has come, we look back at the darkest moments in our history, in Jewish history, the darkest moments or the darkest moments in our personal life, and suddenly we see the redemption. So that's the way the Ger Rebbe explained the Kotzker Rebbe. The Baal Shem Tov says about names the following. I'll read what the Baal Shem Tov says about names. They're still talking about names and the power of names. That's why I want to recommend to people. I don't want to encourage everybody to change their life. I don't, when people come into our and I meet them, I don't say, okay, I have to call you by your Hebrew name, because that kind of like makes it sound like you have to change who you are if you want to have a relationship with me. But I want to encourage people to start thinking about on their own, introducing themselves by their Hebrew name, because there's a power to the Hebrew name. There's a spiritual power that even goes beyond the English name. There's a tremendous power to it. Anyway, there's also often a lot of reason why people are taking the English name. What's your name for somebody who's very special to you? I understand that. So obviously, I'm not saying it's always the case, but you could just think about it as if you just imagine if you met somebody for the first time, and let's say you introduced yourself as, let's say, Peter. It's different than if you introduce yourself as Pinchas. If you say, hi, my name is Peter, everybody says, okay, you're a normal guy. You say, no, I'm Pinchas. Everybody's like, okay, this guy's a Jew. This guy's a Jew. This guy's serious about his Judaism. It's a totally different mindset, totally different direction into who you are. So I want to suggest that people think about that. Carol, are you trying to say something? Hold on 1 second, and then we'll go to the Baal. We'll first hear from Carol, then from the Baal Shem Tov. Let me share what the Baal Shem Tov says. So the Baal Shem Tov says about names. He says as follows. Kishem sha maga gashmi shebein bnei adam ubekach. Just like the physical touch between people is as follows, that a person is able to grasp or to hold the body of his friend, so too the soul in a spiritual manner. You can hold the soul. How do you hold the soul of somebody else? By calling his name, is what the Baal Shem Tov says. You can hold the soul of somebody else by calling his name. Yes, especially when they are no longer alive. You say the names. This is why so many people are moved by Yizkor prayer, and that's where we're saying the names aloud of the people we remember. So by saying their name, you're touching their soul. And the Baal Shem Tov writes, Heidalacha, prove it to you, that a person can be sleeping, and when you call his name, you wake him up. So therefore, you're touching the soul when you call his name. And the Torah is emphasizing that the Jewish people, even when they came to Egypt, the land of Tumah, they had a path towards spirituality. And how was that? That was just through their souls, and that was by their names. Through their names, they were able to achieve this spiritual connection. That's the power of a name, the power of mentioning a name is this deep connection to the soul, So another idea here is from Reb David Meisels of Lutsk. He says, the Eila Shemos, this is another beautiful idea. Eila Shemos B'nai Yisrael Habaim, if you take the last letters of each of these words, you can spell out Tehillim, the Psalms, and it's Sofei Tevos Tehillim. This hints to the fact that whenever a Jew has been in distress, in turmoil, whenever we've been in the Egypts of the world, the mates are in distress, the spiritual remedy that we have is to recite a chapter of Tehillim. That it's a healing which is appropriate for every circumstance in life. I have a book, I want to say it, and I just want to say it before I forget. There is my friend's son is a woman who she went to camp with us, and then she stayed with us in Israel. She was my wife's very close friend, and her son was killed in Israel, very tragically, in the war in Gaza. And they dedicated a book of Psalms for, in his memory, Eliyahu Moshe Zimbalist. And actually, my mother made the ksuba for their wedding, for Sarah and Simi's wedding. And in the Tehillim that they gave me, with his picture on the cover, it says in the back, every single possible circumstance in life, which psalm to say. So if anybody here is ever, in a situation and you want to know which psalm to say, then just call me. I'll just open up that book and I'll tell you, okay, this is the psalm you should say in this circumstance. Because there is a psalm for every single circumstance, and that's the tried and true method of how we deal with difficult circumstances, that we recite a psalm. And so too, it says that this is obviously anachronistic, and I know somebody who's a literalist is not going to appreciate this, but it says in the Bereshit Rabbah that Jacob used to say the entire book of Tehillim when he was in the house of Lavan. That Jacob recited the whole Tehillim in the house of Lavan. That's teaching us this idea that in these moments of darkness, we rely upon the book of Tehillim to hold our hands. I'll hold on. I want to show you the book so you'll like it. Hold on. Here, this is the book, and it says in the back they list all the appropriate Tehillims to say for each situation. So they have here many pages. They say, first of all, say if you're on a sea, if you're on a boat, you write, well, God forbid, Rahman al-Tlan, for a miscarriage, you recite Psalm 1. For a storm at sea, you recite Psalm 2. And to just get whatever, prayers for anything. Let's say you do Psalm 3 and 4. If you have like a bad spirit, if you're down, you recite Psalm 5. Let's say you're in, your eyes are hurting, Psalm 6. Let's say, I don't know, there's so many, we're not going to go through all of them. If you want to know how to kill a demon, Psalm 15. Let's say if you want to publicize who the thief is, Psalm 16. Anyway, there's this beautiful book is a situation for every single psalm. And so that's something that I encourage you to ask me, because anytime we can mention Eliyahu Moshe's name, it's a beautiful thing. So, okay, one more. Here's a teaching from the Chasam Sofer about names. So they asked the Chasam Sofer, the great Chasam Sofer, they asked him, what's the reason that before every single rabbi's name in Israel, they say, Rabbi this person, Rabbi whatever, Rabbi this, Rabbi that. Except for Moshe, we don't say Rabbi Moshe, we say, excuse me, we say Moshe our Rabbi, Moshe Rabbeinu. So this is the type of question Bruce would ask me. So why is, instead of saying Rabbi this, we say Moshe our Rabbi? Why is Moshe different from everybody else? So that's the question they asked the Chasam Sofer. So the Chasam Sofer said Moshe Rabbeinu was because Moshe Rabbeinu was great before even the Torah was given, therefore his name comes before the Torah, before the description, Moshe, our teacher. But everybody else, they got the merit, they got their greatness from the Torah, and so therefore the Torah has to come first, and so therefore their names come following the Torah. That's the Chasam Sofer's answer. And now we look at the Rashi that we just discussed to say that why are their names listed again? To show us how much they're beloved. Lahudia. So the Sfas Emes says this is a beautiful teaching to tell us, a very special teaching about our specific task, that we are compared to stars. How are we compared to stars? That just like the purpose of a star, because this was the Rashi that we discussed, that he says we're comparing us to stars, that Hashem gives a name to every star to show us how much we're loved. But the Sfas Emes says it's also to show us that we Jewish people are compared to stars, just like the purpose of a star is to illuminate in the darkness of night. So our purpose as Jews is to illuminate in the darkness of the world. So that's why we have the same mission in life as a star. But one time I heard a different explanation of this from a bar mitzvah boy who I was teaching. And this boy, he didn't go to a yeshiva or a day school, and I was teaching him maybe 26, 27 years ago, maybe even more actually, maybe 30 years ago. And the boy said to me the following. He said, a star, from a distance, they all look the same. All the stars look the same from the distance. And then when you go up close, you see the greatness, you see just how overwhelmingly bright and luminous each star is. That's like a person. From a distance, you don't realize the greatness of the people. You just see like, oh, there's 300 million people in America. Americans basically are all the same, pretty dumb, like whatever. But then when you go up close, you see the brilliance of the human beings, you see the brilliance of people. And that's the great, and that's why we're compared to stars. And I'll never forget that's what that bar mitzvah boy told me. So, okay, then next point is, I said we'd talk about this. Why does it say the word Haba'im Mitzrayim, who are coming to Egypt? It should say who came to Egypt. That was a question that we raised when we discussed it. So the Meir Einei Yesharim asked this question. He says it's to tell you that this is the way the rabbis talk, and they speak with such beauty you can almost cry when you hear their explanations, because they were writing this in the darkest moments. They were writing this, with the, and you can feel that they're writing this in a moment of distress. He says, why is it written in the present tense? It's to tell you that whenever the Jewish people are in exile or in distress, whenever we're in our own Egypt, whenever the Jewish people are in a place of matzah, a place of distress, place of Egypt, these names will come and redeem us. The tribes of God, in their merit, we will be redeemed. Meaning to say, it's an ongoing promise that whenever we're in places of exile and difficult times as Jewish people, they will come and be a redemption for us, as it says in the plate that the Kohen Gadol wears on his head. It says, "You shall take these two shoham stones, upitachta aleim Shemos b'nei Yisrael, and you will inscribe upon them the names of the children of Israel. And then these names that are inscribed will be names of remembrance, avnei zikaron." And Rashi there explained that a Kadosh Baruch Hu will see that the tribes are written before him, and it will remember their righteousness. And so too, we asked of the names before we went out into battle. We would ask from the Urim V'Tumim. So the idea is that whenever we were in, God forbid, in distress, we would go and ask for Hashem's help in the merit of these tribes, in the merit of our ancestors. So that's why it's said in the present tense. It's to tell us that these names are with us. They're not the past. They're with us right now. That's the power of Jewish history. The power of Torah and Chazal and the tradition is that it's not then and now. We have to feel like they're holding our hands with us as we walk through the darkest moments in our life, darkest moments in our history. That's the idea. Okay, so another idea comes from the also about the idea of the Ba'im in the present tense. I'll give you two more ideas here. One is from the Belzer Rebbe. The Belzer Rebbe says that Yaakov Avinu prayed that his children would have the strength to always be in the frame of mind called a Ba'im, of coming. meaning to say, we don't want to say that we came to Egypt. We always have to be, we're coming, like I'm passing through. Not that I came to settle. That this is the idea, that it's never look at ourselves as being residents of this place. We always have to have in mind, we're just coming here now, but we're going back. Like one time somebody said to me that in Washington, nobody likes to say they're from Washington. Everybody says, I'm from New York. Even though you moved here 60 years ago, you say, oh, I'm from New York. In other places, you could be like the New Yorker, but nobody's like, oh, I came here. No, you came from someplace else. Everybody came from someplace else. So this is the mindset that we have to have as a Jew. The Jew can't be, oh, I'm in Egypt, or I came to Egypt. No, I'm coming, but I'm going. I'm not staying here. That's what the Belzer Rebbe says. The similar ideas from Rebbe Trunk from Kutna. He says as follows. Why is it in the present tense? Because the way of the world is that if somebody moves to another land, at first he watches his protection and his independence, and afterwards he gets assimilated into everything around him. The Torah is telling us that the Jewish people retained their identity the whole time they were in Egypt. It says Reuven went down and Reuven went up. He went down as Reuven, and the tribe of Reuven came up. The tribe of Shimon went down, the tribe of Shimon came up. We retained our identity the whole time we're in Egypt, and therefore it's as though right now they came to Egypt. And one of the keys to retaining our identity was through the names. That's what the Talmud says, that because we didn't adopt 3 ways, there are 3 reasons. And one of them is the name. The other is their dress, that we didn't change our dress. So this is the idea, is that the names went down and the names went up. And I just want to say one more idea here, is a beautiful idea. Haba'im Mitzrayma. This is also such a powerful idea. You hear these names, you hear these teachings, and you also brings tears to your eyes. What does it mean, Haba'im Mitzrayma? Do you know what the numerical value of the word Egypt is? Mitzrayma has the numerical value, says the Chomas Onach, has the numerical value of the divine presence, the numerical value of Shechina, the same gematria as Shechina, to tell us that the Shechina, so to speak, also went into exile with the Jewish people. So even though the Jewish people were in exile, the Shechina was in exile with us. And that's why the Gemara Megillah on Daf Chav Tes tells us that wherever the Jewish people go into exile, the divine presence was with them, meaning we're not alone. So this is the theme of what we discussed today, is the importance, especially when we're in places of darkness and distress, of our names, of our identity, of giving ourselves names. It's so interesting that as part of the Zionist movement, you saw this movement of giving people Zionist names. The politicians in the first generation did it. They dropped their European names. They took on Zionist names, but also they gave their children names of redemption. One of the things that Maharat Ruth is talking about is the names that Hosea was told by God to give his children, to emphasize that they are in exile, to emphasize how lost the Jewish people are. They shouldn't think that they are going down the right path. That was a very strong message in the naming of their children. There's a very big contrast with the opening verse, but then there's the total absence of names until Moshe comes along and has his name. Okay, we're just touching on this a little bit, and God willing, next time we'll go in a little bit more into the portion. On Wednesday, we'll go a little bit, I'll skip it to the birth of Moshe. So let's stop here, and if anybody has any questions, happy to discuss.